Hi everybody, I'm Zilla and welcome. Today we're going to take a look at a prototype copy of Halls of Hegra. Now this is a game produced in Norway by Tompet Games about a historical Norwegian fortress defense during the early stages of World War II. This prototype arrived about a week ago, and I do want to call attention to the fact that it is a prototype, so this is not a final production copy. Some things might change between what we're going to look at today and the final version. Now I know there's also about a week left or so in the Kickstarter as this video is going to be getting to YouTube. In this video, we're going to do a quick overview of the historical conflict. I'm going to do an overview of the game, then we're going to take a look at some of the systems in the game, play a turn, and then I'm going to offer some impressions based on my initial playthrough of the game. So what we're looking at right now is an overview of how my first playthrough ended. And I think if I were to sum up this game in one word, it would be fascinating. There is a lot going on. Each one of these elements of this board, and what we're essentially looking at right now, is the game board here, and the way it's set up represents kind of your command center, how you're going to be managing your troops and trying to defend this fortress. And it's kind of an overview of all the different segments of that. And we'll go in deeper into each one of these segments as we kind of take a deeper look at the game. However, before we jump in and take a look at the game systems themselves, I want to just take a moment and talk about the history behind this game, because I think that's one of the cool things about this game is that it's grounded in an actual historical event. So in April 1940, about 250 Norwegians ended up holed up in this fortress near the town of Hegra and held out against the German army for about 25 days. Now it had all the just some amazing sub-stories to this larger story, in that there were direct assaults on the fortress that the defenders fought off. And one of the direct assaults, like the Germans got lost in the snowstorm and they started shooting each other and couldn't figure out where to go. The German Luftwaffe and artillery dropped about 2,300 bombs on the fortress over the course of the siege. They started running out of water and food. Eventually, they only surrendered to the German army after the rest of kind of southern Norway capitulated, because the Allied attempt to retake Norway had been basically aborted. So the final story is they were all taken prisoner, but they held out for 25 days. Eventually, all of them that were taken prisoner were released by the German army later that summer. In part, I think, because of the heroism that they exhibited in this defense. So we've got an amazing historical backdrop to this game, and the game simplifies to a degree some of these historical elements. For example, instead of 25 days, you're going to play 11 days. But it still captures the whole flow of this battle, in that you're going to have some days to prepare, then you're going to have an initial attacks by the German armies, with you fall back into the fortress, then you're going to have a siege of the fortress that you have to hold out, and then a final last stand. Before we jump in and take a look at the individual systems in the game, let's do kind of a broad picture overview of gameplay. Now, the real historical event again was 25 days, but the gameplay is 11 days, and you have one single goal for these 11 days, which is not to unconditionally surrender to the German army, to not be totally defeated over the course of these 11 days. Now, there are degrees of victory in there as well, ranging from surrender to German retreat, but those are different variations on victory. Your one objective again is to survive these horrendous 11 days where the Germans are basically going to throw everything they can at you to try to get you to surrender unconditionally. Now, each of the 11 days is broken down into a series of stages. And during these stages, things are going to happen. For example, early in the day, you're going to draw an event card. Then the Germans, if you're in that attack part of the game, the Germans are going to attack the fortress. You're going to get hit by artillery later in the day. And then you go from that stage to allocating what you're going to try to do to defend yourselves. Now, the game has these tokens here. I'm showing one over here on the left. The white one here is the medic, that represent your defenders. Some of them can have various different roles. For example, some are going to be soldiers, some are volunteers, you have an officer, you might have some hunters, and then you've got a medic. So each of them specialize in different things, and allocating them appropriately is good. And the middle part of that day basically is you allocate what you want your defenders to do, and then you execute all of those actions. At the end of the day, morale plays a big part of your defense. So you do these morale calculations to see what kind of the general spirit of your defense is. And depending upon that morale state, further good things can happen or further bad things can happen to you. One of the other elements of this game to be aware of is that each day isn't the same. The game is really, each day can fall into one of 4 different categories. you get your mobilization stage, which is your first few days, where the Germans really haven't shown up yet. You might see a couple patrols and stuff like that. That's where you really have some time to make some preparations, recruit a bunch of volunteers and soldiers, and try to get more people in that are going to be able to defend your fortress and make some preparations. Then the Germans show up and you get the first attack stage. That's about 3 days. There's going to be some light attacks, some things are happening. You still got some time to make some preparations. You're getting your last final recruits into the fortress. Then things really get real as you go into Siege 1 and Siege 2. Those 2 stages, the days are a lot more brutal. You're going to face artillery attacks. The attacks on the fortress get more real. You're going to start to lose people, and things really can get dark in those stages there. Then the last part, the game ends. Some of the days end with particular events. You could be your coup phase, your retreat phase, or last stand. These are kind of special events that happen at the end of certain days that create their own little mini games within themselves. So there's a lot going on, and the game is constantly evolving as the state of the siege changes. Now let's jump in though and take a look at some of the different mini systems that you'll be playing with to try to defend your fortress. One of the elements you're contending with as the player is weather. The weather can work for you or against you. And it's one of the other things that I want to try to highlight as we look at these systems is that each system is integrated into other elements of gameplay. And so there's a lot of depth to kind of figure out how one system works and then saying, okay, how is this going to influence other elements on the board? Every day, you're going to have a different and changing weather pattern. So you're going to draw an event card basically, and if we take a look at one of these right here, we can see that the weather is the first thing that we take care of when we start a day. So right now we've got a sunny day. And what that would do is over here on the weather chart, we're going to move our indicator down to sun, which then in turn, because the weather is good, now any troops that you have on the board where you're looking for supplies are going to have a greater movement allowance. We could have snow, which would reduce our movement allowance, and if we get a snowy day, then the snow increases. And if it gets too much, if you're not digging out the fortress and the fortress becomes inundated with snow, you could have another tile from the hit bag, which means that your defenders are going to suffer some consequences. And the cool thing about snow is that if you clear it out enough, you get to remove one of these little snow elements, which means that you have more capacity in your fortress. For example, if we cleared out all the snow, we've discovered a medicine cabinet. This then becomes another mini system that you can use in your defense of the fortress. So weather impacts movement on boards as you're looking for supplies and trying to take out some of the German patrols. It influences the capacity for the fortress to defend itself, and that could work also as a positive or a negative. One of the larger subsystems of this game is the foraging for supplies and the appearance of German patrols here, and then eventually later in the game, German artillery pieces. Now this game has there's little mini systems and mini mechanics within this game. The general idea, especially early in the game, however, is that you're trying to get some of your defenders to navigate this terrain to get up to the top part so that they can eventually bring supplies back. Now these missions might span as many as, well, at least 2 days, but they can span 3, 4, 5 days, depending on how many patrols are in the way and what happens. There's mechanics for taking out these patrols, for sneaking by them. There's mechanics for taking out the artillery pieces, and that's where your soldiers, these red pieces, can be significantly better than some of your other defenders. There's also, we can see on the right-hand side here, a suspicion mechanic. As the German forces get more suspicious of the activity that's going on, they're on heightened alert, which makes it harder to sneak by and all these kinds of things. So there's a fascinating kind of mini game that goes on even in itself. So figuring this out and figuring out how best to utilize this aspect of the game is a key part of learning how to defend your fortress. The other big element of the game, and this is a significant chunk of the middle part of each day, is each one of these little tokens represents a single individual defender in the fortress. Now, we mentioned that there are 250 in real life. In the game, it looks like you're going to have anywhere, probably around, well, towards the end, I didn't have very many, but 20 to 30 different defenders that you're going to be able to maneuver and use to defend your fortress. And one of the big elements of these is that each day in the game, your defenders, hopefully, can take some sort of action. But when they take that action, they get tired. So the middle part of the day, basically, is you can spend some supplies. So if we're in the early part of the day, we can spend 1 supply token, which you got again by foraging on that map that we just looked at. And that will activate 4 of your tired defenders into the ready state. So we could move over any 4 that we wanted to. And now these defenders can be allocated to take actions during the course of the day. So you can see the need for going up and getting supplies, because you need supplies to get defenders that did stuff the day before to go from that tired to the ready state. But getting supplies involves risks. You have to use defenders to do it, and things can go badly. Not only that, as we'll see, there are different ways you can lose supplies in other unfortunate events which create all kinds of problems. So there's other sub-mechanics in here. The efficacy of supplies changes as you get later in the game. The number of defenders that can activate by 1 supply cube, it changes from 4 to 3 to 2 and then eventually just 1. So you want to kind of you got to keep that in mind, and you're constantly worrying about running out of supplies, essentially food and water. So once you've got these defenders activated during the day, the next thing you do in the course of the day is allocate their actions. And this is where the game gets really cool. Most of the bottom half of the game board is where you allocate these defenders. Basically, you're going to have them do tasks over the course of that day. We can take a look. And this is where I think the game's fascinating depth really starts to play out, because you've got so many things you can do with them. Let's take a look at just a few of them here. So one of the big tasks that you can put your defenders on as it gets later in the game is defending the walls. And so you've got 4 positions here. And again, to show how these systems are integrated, when the game starts out, these are all broken, so you got to fix them. And then as you take artillery hits, they can break again. Also adding into this, where you're going to put defenders, and basically how it works is that each one of these defenders is going to get a shot at an attacker. But you could also, in this game that we dug out the field telephone from underneath the snow, and we got that kind of working, not all the way working. Well, we didn't fully repair it, but you can put people on this, which increases your chance to actually hit the defenders. You've also got options for a reckless defense, which is where you can hit 2 enemies and your defender gets injured. So you can use a defender that way if things get really desperate, kind of a single charge at the enemy. There's a machine gun mechanic in here, and we'll kind of take a look again at the attacking momentarily. But one of the big ways, again, you allocate people is in the defense of the walls of the fortress, especially later in the game. A second way that you allocate defenders is by firing artillery. Now you can see in this game, one of the reasons why I think I lost, this is kind of my thing I want to change next time, is I wasn't really able to get the gun dug out very well. I got it dug out a little bit, but then it got hit by artillery and it's completely broken again, even though we were able to successfully get out a second gun by digging it out of the snow. So again, seeing how the weather integrates with the mechanics and the defense. But yeah, our gun never really played a role in this defense, and that's one of the reasons why I think we did pretty poorly. So in my second attempt, I definitely want to concentrate on getting this gun dug out more, and if we can, again, finding the second one. I feel like that was pretty lucky, because 2 defenders can man both guns, which is really pretty powerful. You can do a lot of damage with this, and we just never did in this attempt. A third place where you can allocate defenders are on supply runs. And we saw that with the whole supply mechanic board, where you're trying to have guys navigate the patrols and artillery nests to be able to get supplies. You can also dig out a capacity called a counter patrol, which we didn't in this game. So this is kind of where you're going to be sending, especially early in the game, to send your forces out to try to get some supplies to help you to be able to defend the fortress better by having people do more things and having enough energy to do them. A big place where you can allocate your defenders is in the maintenance capacities, and there's a lot of these. We talked about how you can put people up here to shovel snow, and hunters are good at that, and officers can't do that, because that's going to reduce the amount of snow, and that frees up those capacity cards. You basically flip one over when you get snow down to 0, and then, for example, here we would have opened up the medicine cabinet again there. So you can see how allocating here increases the capacity of your forces to do things later in the game. Repair is another one of the maintenance things. This basically fixes those broken things and allow you to remove a repair token. Bolster is a big one that I didn't do early in the game. This one is somewhat subtle because it adds to the defense every time you do that. So when the Germans started attacking our defense on the walls, our walls were basically at a strength of 0, which meant we took some pretty severe casualties, and that meant a lot of people in the infirmary. And once that starts happening, things really start to spiral out of control. So now you can also use your officer to promote a defender. Basically, you can take a volunteer and turn them into a soldier. And soldiers have better capacities at kind of taking on the enemy, which especially I think as you get to the later stages of the game can be really helpful. Lastly, you can have your officer, who's twice as good, or two other people, try to inspire the troops, which raises morale. And we'll take a look at morale fairly soon here, because morale plays a big role in the game too. So again, you can see there are tons of things to do, and a lot of those snow cards increase other capacities where you can spend time. So you always have things to do, and you never have enough people to do them. One of the really neat mechanics about the game, although you're kind of in dire straits when you're messing around with it, is the infirmary. So there's a ton of ways that people can get injured, either by event cards or through combat and things like that, getting hit by artillery, just all kinds of things can really mess with your defenders. And you have 3 beds, and if you get them in the beds here, they gradually get better. When they reach the top, they go out. You can also allocate defenders to take care and to kind of increase the recovery of the defenders. If you don't have enough beds for the defenders, they go into this waiting area, and people in the waiting area, the injured without capacity for beds, they gradually get worse. They can end up in the morgue and be dead. So a lot of this is kind of I feel like one of the key things to playing well is to not have this be kind of beyond capacity. Things really started spinning south for me in this game when I got more people into the infirmary than I had beds, because then you're putting people up here instead of doing productive stuff. They're just trying to keep people from not dying, and it just goes from bad to worse. But it's a really cool kind of mini game within itself to see how the infirmary plays out in the game. So we talked about how the game morphs, how each different state of the game, mobilization, first attack, siege, and the 2 siege states are different. And this bottom left corner of the map, the mechanic that's down here, the defend the walls that we looked at earlier for allocating defenders, is probably the part of the game that really changes the most in each different stage. And in the earlier part of the stage, you put this card down on top of it, and you use this card to basically open up new supply routes or negotiate with kind of the defenders to help reduce fear and doubt, kind of things like that. As you get into the first attack stage, we use this little attack board, and we'll show how it works, roughly show how it works, where you're going to get some Germans starting to attack the fortress. Then, once that stage is done and you get to the siege stage, this is where things get real. You're going to get a lot more attackers coming onto the board. They're going to move forward towards your defenders in waves. They can either throw grenades, they can shoot directly at you, they can move up. If they reach this charge box, things get really ugly. You've got a machine gun mechanic here that can be used later in the game that can really help eliminate some of the defenders. You can bring artillery fire to bear. So this game within the game, I think, is really important to master. And it's something I totally messed up in my first attempt, because in the very first attack we had guys charging the fortress, and that sent people to the infirmary and stuff. It got really bad pretty quickly. And there's all kinds of little sub rules for how you're moving these into the different boxes and phases and what they do, and it all plays out really fast. Like one of these little mini attacks probably takes maybe 2 or 3 minutes to kind of resolve, and it happens every day as it gets later in the game. And what you're trying to do is hold out as long as you can here and try not to send too many people to the infirmary. But I didn't play this part of the game very well, and that's where things got really kind of went sideways pretty quickly. One of the other ways the game really messes you up is in the later stages of the game, the artillery and the air attacks start. And these basically involve picking out damage kind of tokens from inside this artillery bag. And how many you have to pick out depends on how many artillery pieces are over on that search for supplies, kind of the area map. And you can reduce those again with soldiers. So again, you can see how these mechanics start to interplay. You can reduce through various actions how many of these are going to end up in the hit bags, and these represent different air attack statuses. And you can see here, as you would pull these, as these go into the bag by various actions, pulling them out injures a defender. They could reduce your morale. They could destroy supplies and things like that. They can also break the things you've already repaired. So things can get really nasty when the artillery and the air attacks start later in the game. One of the neat aspects of the game that shows up throughout the course of the game is morale. And as you're playing through a particular day, morale's going to go up or it's going to go down. And then at the end, you do kind of morale check to kind of make some final modifiers. And at the end of each day, your morale is going to be either green, it's going to be in the positive at a certain level, or red and a certain negative level. Why that's important is that depending on whether your morale is high or low at the end of the day, you can draw morale cards. If it's high, you get to draw high morale cards. And in high morale cards, good things happen. If your morale is low, you're picking from the low morale deck, and if it's low morale, bad stuff happens. So it's another one of these systems where you're constantly trying to evaluate, okay, if I take high morale, chances are something's good's going to happen to me at the end of the day. If I have low morale, more bad stuff's going to happen. And so how the whole day unfolds and where you spend your energy creates these intertwining systems that, again, I go back to that one word that I keep thinking of this game. It's really fascinating. I mean, I played through it once now, and I'm like, I feel like I learned so much, and there's so many more things I want to try. That brings us to the question, the last question, is what about depth and replayability? And I want to address that a little bit because I think that's a legitimate question, and I want to show how the game works with that. And that leaves us with one of the big things that we haven't looked at yet, which are the event cards. So every day starts with the draw of an event card, and these cards have unique decks depending upon which state of the game that you're in. Here's the mobilization cards, here's your first attack, Siege 1, Siege 2, and then there's the special 3 cards that you pick from the last stand. So every day starts with picking one of these cards. So if you're in the mobilization phase, you pick it, and now you can see how you start to get some variability, right? Something's going to happen. The weather's going to be cloudy in this, the weather changes, an event happens that has some flavor text to it to tell you what happens, and this can be significant enough that it's going to really impact what you do during the day. On the right-hand side of this, you have a priority sequence for where your defenders are going to get injured and you're going to suffer losses and things like that. And then it gives you some information down below on some of the other things that you're doing. Because one of the things that you do early on in the game is you're trying to recruit more defenders. And there's a whole bag pull system that you use to bring more defenders into your group of volunteers that are going to defend this fortress. So you can see that each game's going to play out very differently because these events can vary pretty widely in terms of their impact and what systems they impact. So you're going to have every time you play, you're going to have a fairly different kind of impact of these different cards here. So I think that's going to create a lot of variability in play. In addition to that, the other place that I think kind of really creates a lot of variance in play is in the snow removal mechanic. So we talked about how when you dig the defenders out of snow, you get to flip over one of these little snow cards. And this opens up a whole different system in the game. For example, we've seen the medicine cabinet. Here you get some more supplies and you get higher morale, which can help for that particular day. Here we get new supplies, gain 2 supplies. Here we get a map room, which has certain capacities and capabilities that allow you to do different things a little bit better. So again, there's a lot of these cards in here. There's probably a good dozen or more or so of these cards. And probably each playthrough, I'm going to guess you're probably going to unlock maybe, I think I unlocked 3 in this playthrough, 2 maybe actually. I didn't do very well. But as you go through, you're probably going to unlock 3 or 4, and that's going to give you different strengths that you can take advantage of in your defense. So the combination of the event cards and the combination of the snow mechanic that's going to add different capacities that are different each time you play, I think is going to really force you to not have one set style of play, but really adapt to the changing conditions of this particular defense. In addition to the snow removal mechanics that create variety of play and the event cards that create variety of play, the third element for this is in your recruiting bag. We didn't really talk too much about recruiting, but in the earlier stages of the game, you're going to be drawing defenders out of this bag, which represents kind of the pool of recruits that can come to the fortress. And you can get a wide variety. You might, for example, get in one play, you might get a lot of soldiers. You might in another play get a lot of volunteers. You might get no medics. You might get a lot of hunters and a lot of medics, but few soldiers. And that's going to force you to really adapt your gameplay. And the number of recruits that you get can depend a lot on whether you pull one of these little doubt markers out as you're recruiting, because these doubt markers means that basically the recruiting stops at that point in time and you only get one recruit. So you could have, it can vary in number, it can vary in type and capacity, and that, again, combined with the event cards and the snow removal mechanic that opens up different elements of the system gameplay, going to really change to make, I think, every sort of game feel a little bit unique and throw different challenges at you. Now, that's a lot of talk about the various systems in the game, but I wanted to do one thing before we finish up. We're just going to play the very first turn, which isn't going to show everything because we're not going to see artillery or infantry attacks, but just to give you a sense of how kind of integrated all the gameplay is and to see how all these various systems start to play out in the game. So let's play the very first turn of a new game. So as the game starts out, we're on turn 1 of 11 turns, and this is a mobilization phase game. Mobilization phase consists of the first 3 turns of the game, and we start every turn with drawing a card for the particular phase. So let's draw the mobilization phase card and cover and act it out. The first thing that we do with the mobilization phase here is that we activate the weather. And so this is cloudy. Let's go down and take care of that. We can see that the weather is cloudy. This is our weather marker. It starts the game at the cloudy marker, so the movement on our search for supplies board is going to be 1 to 5. The snow level stays the same because snow didn't fall. However, now we execute the actions of the event itself. It says you lose 2 morale. The heart marker is a morale. Basically, the prospect of bitter cold and frostbite is taking its toll on the recruits. So morale drops on our very first day by 2. That's not good. Let's go execute that. So over here on the morale modifiers board, on the morale track, we drop it 1 down to 2. If the turn ends with our morale at this level, it means we're going to have to draw 3 low morale cards and resolve 2 of them. That's hurt. So we might want to take some steps here to basically mitigate the damage of low morale, see if we can get our morale up here on the first day. So the last 2 stages of the mobilization phase, this kind of event phase, are to activate these last 2 parts of the card. One says you want to add 1 of these little doubt tokens. Now, I think in the final version of the game, they're going to be pink, but right now they're orange. So we add 1 of these doubt tokens, I'll do this off camera, inside the recruit bag. And then the next step is that we add recruits to our force. And I just want to show you what's inside this bag and how this works as we're starting out. So we can see inside the bag are all these different defenders that we can add to our defense force. We're going to pick 1 to 4 kind of tokens from the bag. However, if at any time we pick the doubt token, the recruiting process ends, we move anything, we can only get 1 of however many that we've recruited so far into the game. So we want to avoid doubt tokens, and if we get 3, the question is, do we want to pick that 4th one? But let's see how it goes. So I've reloaded the doubt tokens back into the bag. Now off camera here, I'm just going to kind of pull 1 out. We're going to see what we get. Our chances of getting a doubt token are really low, so I think we're going to be aggressive here. We've got 1 soldier. That's good. Now we're going to keep going because we want to get at least 2 here if we can. A 2nd soldier. Nice. Now there's only 2 doubt tokens in here. So in this stage of the game, the chances of getting a doubt token are really low. So I want to be a little bit more aggressive. Not a good start. Okay, so what happens is when you pick a doubt token, we only get 1 of the ones. We're going to pick our soldier. The other soldier goes into the reserve bag. The doubt marker goes back into the recruit bag, and we have had a disastrous recruiting in our first stage, only getting 1 soldier to join our forces. So we are going to take this soldier and add him to our forces here, but we didn't get a medic, we didn't get a hunter. It would have been really nice to add 4. So you can see already how the game's variability is playing out. We could have 1 to 4 different recruits in here. We've only got 1. This is a tough start for us. With that in mind, we've finished the event phase of the game. We put that event card into the discard pile, and now it's time for us to go into the mourning phase. In the mourning phase, the first thing we do is we can move any defenders that are in rest into the ready state, or anybody that's in tired, we can expend supplies to move them into the ready state as well. Because this is the first day, nobody's tired and nobody's resting. Everybody's ready to go, so let's allocate our defenders. All right, so the black token here represents our officer, and I'm a little bit concerned about having -2 morale, so we're going to take our officer and we're going to move him down here onto the maintenance phase, and we're going to have him inspire our troops. As an officer, normally it takes 2 defenders to inspire the troops. Because he's an officer, he's twice as effective, so we're going to put him down there. When we execute that action, our morale is going to go up 1 level, mitigating some of the damage of those low morale cards. Let's figure out what to do with our other defenders. In the mobilization phase of the game, one of the things that you can do is open up new supply routes. So we're going to take 2 volunteers, and we're going to bring them down here to this mobilization stage of the game. We're going to put them right on open up a new supply route. So this is going to add another supply route, and we'll show how that works when they execute that action. Now, unfortunately, we only have 4 soldiers left, but one thing that I do want to do, because early in the game it's pretty easy to get supplies, we're going to take one of our soldiers and we're going to move them up here onto the fortress, send out a new supply run. So we're going to send this soldier out foraging for supplies. Gosh, we really don't have enough defenders. That recruiting really hurt us. Hopefully the next round will be better. We're going to take one of our soldiers though, and for what little it's worth, we're going to say shovel snow. Now, if we had a hunter, they would shovel snow at twice the effectiveness, but we're going to just start to move that there because I feel like we really need to open up a couple of the extra capacities that reducing the snow level helps with. With only 2 defenders left to go, we're going to take both of our soldiers together and we're going to have them come down and do something I didn't do in my previous game, which is to bolster our defense. So we're going to drop 2 of them in here. That's going to allow us to advance the defense level of the fortresses. So now we've allocated all of our measly group of defenders. We have nobody left in the ready pile. Now the next stage that we do is we're going to start to execute these actions. In the way you execute these in the game, each one of the possible actions they can take is numbered, so it's generally advisable to do these in order, so we will. We're going to start with defend the walls. Again, there's no Germans attacking. If we're in a later stage, this whole part of the board would be German forces attacking our fortress. But one of the things we did in defend the walls right now is open up a new supply route. So we're going to take these 2 volunteers who did that, we're going to move them up to tired, so they're going to start the next day tired, and we're going to go up to the supply board and open up another supply route. So here is our supply board. Now we can see that one route is already open up here with the 3 supply tokens. We're going to open up another one, which means we take either our German patrol influence reduced, misses for artillery fire, or morale elements here. We're going to take and open up the morale route here. So this basically will help us bolster our morale. We're going to add those 3 in there. That means we could now send one of our soldiers up to get these supplies that will also, in addition to bringing us supplies, will give us a little bonus to morale. Given where our morale is right now, that might have been handy to have coming in already, but we don't. So our first soldiers have executed their actions. Let's go to our next action execution. So number 2 is fire artillery, but our artillery is completely broken. We have to fix it and we have nobody allocated there. So repairing the artillery is something we want to get busy at, but we're not there yet. Action number 3 is the supply run. We're going to send out a new supply run. The way we do that is we drop them on top of the fortress. So once we've moved our defender out to start a supply run, now we can move them. Because it's a cloudy day, his movement capacity is 5. And we could go for one of these 2 supply depots essentially. This is a bonus to supplies in addition to supplies. This is a bonus to morale. But if we'll notice, it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 to get to the morale one. It's only 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 to get to the supply one. And you have to stop when you get to the depot. So we're going to have him go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 up to the supply depot, and we're going to load him up with a load of supplies to bring back to the fortress on the second day. So now we go down to the maintenance actions. We're going to perform all of these. One of our intrepid soldiers is shoveling snow, so let's move him to the tired box because he's done, and let's go see the results of his action. We're going to come up here to the snow area, and this is the marker for the snow level. Right now it's at 3, we're going to reduce it to 2. You might be saying again, what's the big deal again? Well, when we get it down to here and then down to here, it's flipped the top snow card, and that means we get the capacity, which is always good, of this snow being revealed. So we're making some progress at getting our first snow card unearthed. The next action that our defenders performed was to bolster, and our 2 defenders come down here. We're going to add 1 to the mission defense. So first, we're going to move them back up to the tired box near the supply area because they're done for the day, and let's go see the result of their action. So here is our defend the walls, and the first thing that we can do is move the defense level here, which was the bolster, from 0 to 1. This will help us in the eventual defense of the fortress. Lastly, our officer inspired everybody. He's tired now, so we'll move him over to the tired box. But let's go to the morale track and see what he was able to accomplish. Our morale track now sits at -2. It's a bad, dark day for the first day of the defense. But thanks to our officer inspiring everybody, we're only half as depressed. So now we're going to be able to draw 2 low morale cards and resolve 1. And with that, we've resolved the actions of everybody. We can see back over here now that we've got a number of tired people. Everybody's tired because they've done stuff, so we're going to have to do something in the next day to help them get untired, if you would. But that brings us to the end of performing everybody's actions today. With everybody's actions out of the way, it's now to perform an analysis of our morale and the results of it. We have a number of different modifiers here, none of which apply to us at this point in time. Our mobilization doubt marker doesn't influence this. It's not a red day on the calendar. Those are special days, and when they're on the first day isn't one. We're not out of supplies because we have supplies. No defenders in the waiting area of the infirmary, and there's no defenders that have died yet, so that's -1 per. And there's no attackers in red sector. So none of these, which apply mostly later in the game, apply to us at this point in time. That means our morale is, as our morale is, we're at -1. And we'll note down here that it says draw 2 low morale cards and remove and resolve one of them. So we're going to pick 2 low morale cards and see what we get. Here is the very first one, low morale, and here is the next one, low morale. So under the mobilization phase, the low morale either to increase the suspicion level by 1 or add 1 patrol. We're going to increase the suspicion level by 1, and we're going to add this other one back to the card. I'd rather have the suspicion up at this point than the patrol. Not quite sure if I know what I'm doing, so don't take that as gospel, but let's go do that. So basically what happens is this kind of the result of this event is that the suspicion of the German patrols that are going to be out on the board, on the kind of the supply map looking for us, is going to go up. So let's go resolve that. So right on the corner of this board here, the suspicion track goes from a 1 to a 2. That's not ideal, but I feel like that's the lesser of all the evils there. So our low morale having an impact on us. It's make the Germans a little bit more wary of our activities. Now the last thing I did here is I reset the morale from -1 to 0. So that goes back to where it was to start for the next turn because it's adjusted each day. Now the last thing we have to do is to check to see if we surrender, and so we're going to do that. So this is very early in the game, so we're certainly not going to surrender, but you make a check for this at the end of each day. 3 or more defenders in the morgue, nope, the surrender level will go up, we're good there. 4 or more defenders in the waiting area of the infirmary, nope, we're good there. 6 artillery pieces on the map, no, there's none, we're not to that part of the game. Siege, if it's during siege, we do this other check, but we're on the very first stage of the game. So we're nowhere close to having the surrender state get worse. If we did, the surrender state would increase by 1 or 2, depending on how many things apply. And if we ever hit this unconditional surrender at any point in the game over, we automatically lose. As the game starts, we're at this honorable surrender level here. So the last thing, and one of the nice things about this game that I haven't mentioned yet is that in so many places in the game, it kind of guides you as to what to do next. So we've got the neat player aid that shows the sequence of play, but right under this surrender state, it says check the turn track for these special events. So let's see if any of those happen. So we are down in the turn track in the mobilization phase, turn 1, and we can see indeed that there's these special 2 patrol markers that happen. And what basically means now is that German patrols are starting to show up in the area. We've seen no German activity so far, it's day 1, but alas, here we have 2 patrols show up. So let's go put those onto the board. So inside this bag are 12 different patrol markers, and this is going to tell us where they go. Basically, they fall on the row of the board by the stage of the game that you're in. This is the fortress down here. Right now in the mobilization stage, which is color-coded green, they're going to show up way up here, which is quite a ways away from our fortress. Now, what we want them to do, of course, is not show up here, because this would block our soldier trying to get back with supplies and mess us all up. So we're hoping that they show up in one of these other places. I'm going to randomly pull 2 out of the bag here to see how that impacts things here. So I'm pulling the first one out, and this stoplight is a 2. So we put this patrol in spot 2, which is good because it's really not in the way of anything there at this point. So that's pretty helpful. I'd take that over anything. Let's hopefully we don't get a 1 here now. That would be kind of a bummer. Our next patrol shows up in spot 4. Excellent. So we don't have anything there yet. Now eventually we'd have to get around him if we're trying to get to this other supply destination, but we haven't brought those in yet. So that's a problem to be solved later. And with that, we have finished our first turn. So the last thing we would do is we'd move from mobilization turn 1 to mobilization turn 2 and basically go through that same procedure here. Now you can see that we're only going to do 3 turns. We have a little coup event at the end that switches us to the first German showing up. As the game moves along, we're going to have a number of turns, 3 turns here in the first attack stage. Then we go into the siege state in the last stand. And that's when, as we get into this first attack stage, so turn 4, that's when the German defenders start to attack. And as we get into the siege state, that's where the artillery shells start to fly. So you got attacks and artillery shells. It starts to get really hairy as you get down to turn 7 or so. So the game kind of picks up intensity as it goes along. Right now it's pretty chill. We didn't see any Germans until the very end when those first 2 patrols showed up. So with that, we've taken a look at all the major systems in the game, and we've played through a first turn. Now again, this first turn didn't include infantry attacks, which are different, a whole little subsystem to the game, and artillery attacks, which come late in the game, that really can start to get things hairy. But hopefully this gives you still a sense of gameplay and how things flow. Some general observations. 1, this is a hard game. There's a lot of systems, and understanding the interplay between those systems and which areas of which systems to emphasize in your defense, which is going to be different depending upon the event cards, the snow removal, and your recruiting. They're all going to make each gameplay be subtly different and force you to react in different ways. So I think this is going to be a game that you come back to again and again, and you're going to lose quite a bit. I think looking at some of the replay videos created by other people who have kind of had the prototype, I didn't see anybody win, and I lost my first replay pretty handily on what would have been day 9. So it's going to be a tough game, and I think it's an intellectually challenging game. Again, that adjective that comes to my mind is fascinating. Very much looking forward to seeing how the final version evolves. And again, as this video is going to YouTube, I think there's about a week or a little bit less perhaps left in the Kickstarter, so a chance to still jump on board if this looks like something that you'd like. Let me know down below in the comments if you've got questions and things that I might be able to answer. And again, please keep in mind that this again is a prototype version, so the final version, some of the colors of the pieces, maybe some of the markers with stickers and things like that, might be a little bit different in the final version. I'm not quite aware of how it's going to be different, but I do know there will be some changes in that final version. So keep in mind again that this was a prototype look at the game. Thank you so much for tuning in. I hope you've enjoyed this, and let me know what you think of Halls of Hegra. Take care, everybody. We'll see you again in another video.